So welcome that you're actually watching my talk, exploring macros in Libreoffice and why it could be actually interesting for you. Yeah, some stuff about me. My name is Alex. I'm called InsertScript on Twitter. I also have a really awesome blog. No, but actually every finding I have and I'm allowed to publish is on my blog. So in case anything is unclear or I'm talking too fast, you will most likely find a blog post about it. I'm working as a penetration tester for Q53, like this gentleman here. I'm mostly a browser and web guy, but I started 6 years ago to learn about PDF and how it works. And yeah, I actually spent all the 6 years on PDF. So yeah, it's a nice read. And so I decided last year to move on to another file format. Besides that, I play, I don't know, Counter-Strike, and I watch shitty B-Shark movies. This is kind of important. So what will be discussed today? A really simple overview how I start learning a new file format. I will talk about my latest, it's a kind of a simple finding in PDF, but it showcased how understanding the file format really helps you to find bugs when you need them, basically. Then we will move on to Libreoffice and some client-side attack I found, and how this would work on the server side. And we will talk about sharks. So maybe you don't care about file formats at all. Yeah, you're kind of right, but also wrong. Nowadays, more and more stuff gets converted on the file on the server side. I don't know, like just think of JPEG to PNG, or I don't know. Sometimes you can upload some file document format which gets converted to PDF for a preview feature. Nobody really wants to read the whole documentation, and you will see later why. There's also Imagemagick, which helped me a lot to actually get into all this. And the last part is, it's really fun, and it's always nice to have other people I can talk to who suffer the same way I do, basically. Oh yeah, the first awesome movie I have to talk about, and yeah, that's a real movie. It's Six-Headed Shark Attack. There is 2, 3, 4, but not 5. They skipped that one. And this one is really terrible. For some reason, he can walk on land with his head. Okay, so how I approached stuff with Libreoffice. And it sounds super simple, but believe me, it's easy to make a mistake here. You really should install the latest, I don't know, developer version, enterprise version, professional version, whatever the name is. The reason is quite simple, because most of the time you can use the application to use certain features, and the standard viewer, which everybody's using, actually supports the feature as well. So it really helps you to get proper coverage of the file format. Another important point, get the documentation. Never expect that the documentation is awesome and explains everything and contains everything, because most of the time it's old, incomplete, and really fucking huge. Yeah, then you complain about how it makes no sense. Then you read it again. Then yeah, you start to look for keywords. The keywords can change for each documentation because they just name it differently all the time. You click like a maniac on every available feature in the program. For some reason, it's always the case that certain features do not work when you actually click on them. yeah, then you start to Google, you go to Google, search for them. The keyword you should always include is not working, because then you find some forums where people complain the feature is not working, and you can see some explanations how it should work and stuff like that. Yeah, also you really have to read how the actual file looks like when the program created the file, like with PDF. It looks completely different at first, what you expect when you read the documentation, and it's basically always true. Yeah, you have to get used to use standard text editors, or sometimes you need to read hex stuff, or just write some scripts so you can actually understand what's going on. And then you can start mapping the documentation and the features to the actually created files. And then you repeat these steps for 5 years. One nice thing, this is especially true for Windows, check the file extensions. As a nice example for PDF, or when you install Adobe Reader, there is one file extension called PDF XML, which doesn't really work anymore. There's actually a link trigger that you have to download a module, and when you open it, it's a 404 page. And if you want to be cool, instead of using .pdf, you can use .acrobat security settings, and it's the same identical stuff. Oh yeah, this movie. Maybe you can already guess what this shark can do. Instead of water, he lives on the beach. And for some reason, the people decide, hey, we still want to be on the beach. So they have to fight him. Don't worry, Sharknado is not even once in this presentation. So, yeah, as promised, my last example for file format stuff you can do when you know the file format really well is PDF. Over the years, I learned that PDF can send HTTP requests via 2 different languages, actually. There is one executable just handling comments, and there is stuff like XML support. And the XML support is actually important because last year there was a GitHub repo called Bad PDF, and when it was opened on Windows with Adobe Reader, it would send a request to an SMB share of an attacker, and suddenly Adobe patched it, and I was kind of surprised, so I decided I can do that. It's not difficult. So I think it took me 1 day, maybe less. And basically what I used is the fact that XML is supported. So I used an XSL style sheet inside the XML structure, which was loaded from a remote SMB share. And this allows, once again, to leak the anti-mail hash. And I didn't report it, and it was fixed nevertheless. So I decided to do another bypass, because I had some time. And the patch was basically, they only allow internal IPs or domains without a dot, so they don't break stuff for companies, I assume. Maybe you think about using, I don't know, like IPv6, or you can represent IPs without a dot. That's also possible. But actually on Windows you don't even have to do that, because there is an awesome blog post from James Forsher from Google Project Zero, where he explains how Windows handles a lot of the path stuff, and he also mentions SMB shares, or UNC paths as they're called. And basically in Windows what you can do, there are 2 devices called LANman redirector and WebDAV redirector. And all they do is tell Windows if you want to use SMB as the protocol or WebDAV, which is basically HTTP. And you specify it, as you can see it on the slides, and this works fine on Windows, and it contains no dot. So this was another bypass. It was actually fixed, and then I stopped. I got kind of bored. But it shows you that Windows is kind of awesome when it comes to this kind of stuff. Oh yeah, I could talk a lot about this one, because Sharktopus has actually 3 movies. Yeah. In this one, he fights Whale Wolf, which was created by an evil female German scientist for some reason. But don't worry, Sharktopus wins, of course. Yeah, sorry. Oh no, I already told you it's a trilogy. So, let's come to LibreOffice. I started, I think, last year, if I remember correctly, and the reason was Imagemagick is used a lot on the back end to convert any kind of stuff. I was aware of Imagemagick, and Google Project Zero found a lot of stuff in GhostScript, which allowed remote code execution, and GhostScript is also supported by Imagemagick. And I decided, I tried it as well. Why not? And there's a file called delegates.xml, which contains a lot of file extensions supported. And I decided, oh, okay, it supports S-Office, which is either OpenOffice or LibreOffice. And that's basically the reason how I got started with this. I basically used LibreOffice Writer the whole time during this time. And there are some differences between the different applications, but most of the time they are quite similar actually. What also is quite nice is that the ODT file format is a zip-based file format, so you can easily modify it. And there is an even better file extension called FODT, which is one huge XML file, which is basically the same as ODT. And you can easily modify it and just play around. And then I grabbed the documentation. So I Googled documentation. There's like the OpenDocument version 1.2. I just assumed that's the latest one. It has 3 parts and then some additional specifications, and yeah, when you combine them, it's like 1,200 pages to read. I just decided I go with the part 1. Makes kind of sense to start at the beginning. Compared to the PDF, it's not that much. I did once the math, and when you combine on PDF all the important documents, you're over 4,000 pages. I think it's, I compare it to Harry Potter or stuff like that, and it's kind of in this area. So maybe you know now why nobody wants to read the whole documentation. Yeah, after that I just started to look for interesting keywords. And there were actually quite a lot, like script source, macro, script event listener, everything sounded like perfect, but it didn't contain any structure examples, which was kind of a pain. And at first I couldn't really find where I can use macros. I found like the settings and stuff like that, but I wanted to create an example document. And last year was at BrewCon, and I was maybe a little bit tired from the day before, and I didn't want to go to the talk, so I decided I sit down and just Google for 1 hour, and I will find this. And I actually did. I found the scripting framework URI specification, and it contains not only how the script URI has to look, it also specifies which languages are supported, and it supports Python, JavaScript, Bean Shell, Python, yeah, and BASIC for some reason. And I was wondering how they actually support Python, and LibreOffice and OpenOffice actually ship their own Python interpreter when you install them. It's basically bundled in there. So where was it actually hidden, this nice feature? There are different places, but the first one I found is when you create a hyperlink, there is this really small icon, and it handles the macros for hyperlinks. And it also shows you which events you can use. I choose the mouse over, what it's called, mouse over object in this case. So when the mouse is over the hyperlink, the macro gets executed. And then I just used one of the pre-installed macros from Python, because I like Python, basically. That was the sole reason. And then I checked the file, because finally I could have a look how it's created. And that's the element handling that. And I think it's quite obvious when you look at it that it specifies a file which is on the file system. In this case, it's table_sample.py, then there is a $, and create table. So I decided, okay, I will find this file. I found it, and I looked into it, and of course, it has a really simple function called create table. So what would you try when you see that? Maybe I can traverse anywhere. So I decided, traverse down to the root folder and just place test.py in C and create a function called test and see if it gets executed. So I saved that file, opened it in LibreOffice, moved my mouse over the hyperlink, and my script got executed without any dialogue or warning or whatsoever. So this was the point where I found, where I was really convinced this is not intended. But I prefer to have a proof of concept which works without any requirements, basically. So my first idea was to use a different location. You can define like a location user, which is on Windows, the app data folder. On Linux, it's in the user folder, as a user home directory, and I assume from Mac it's the same. And my idea was that I trigger a download of my malicious LibreOffice file on Windows, specify a script inside the app data folder, traverse down, then traverse up into the downloads folder and specify the same Office file as a Python script file. So basically, I would need to create a LibreOffice file, which is also a valid Python script. And sadly, that didn't work. It would have been cool. But LibreOffice is actually really strict about data before the zip header. It allows, for some reason, to merge two zip files, and then it just reads the later one. But you can't add anything else. And so I kind of gave up and decided I need another solution. So I actually read the code, so because it was also written in Python. And I discovered that parameters are supported. So not only can you load any Python script and any Python function, but you can also pass parameters. So, of course, when you install Python, there are a lot of Python files. So I had a look into all the files, all Python files, which are shipped with LibreOffice by default. And there was one really interesting one. It's called pydoc.py, and it has a function called temp file pager, and one parameter is called cmd. It's quite short, and maybe you can already see what it does when you understand Python. So basically, you can ignore the first lines. It just creates a temp file. And then the cmd parameter gets passed to os.system, which is the Windows shell in this case. And you can basically execute any program, download, I don't know, whatever you want. And the payload actually looked quite simple in the end. All you need to do is traverse 3 folders down into the Python core folder of Libreoffice and execute this nice function. And I did an awesome recording of that, of course. If it works, yeah. So it's really short. So basically, I created this malicious structure as I just shown. And yeah, that. Of course, because I've used Python, which is shipped by default. It works on Windows, Linux, and Mac. So that's quite nice. Then I started to finally report this issue. And I made a little mistake and reported it to their Bugzilla system, which is not intended for security bugs in LibreOffice. So it got closed. And I responded with, "Are you sure?" Maybe have another look. Here is a proof of concept for Windows, so maybe try that one. And then they were like, "Oh, that's a security issue," and moved it to the right location, which is actually a specific email address you should write to. And then things got moved quite fast. LibreOffice, I can't remember how many days, but they fixed it really fast. But then they told me I have to wait because OpenOffice is sharing some code with OpenOffice and LibreOffice are sharing some code, and they are vulnerable to the traversal as well. So they told me to wait 3 months. They didn't fix it, and then they decided I'm allowed to publish the details. In OpenOffice, the issue is not as big because they didn't actually implement the parameter support. But one problem is OpenOffice is still vulnerable. There's still no patch available, so not sure if there ever will be a patch for that actually. But LibreOffice is safe. I can tell you that. So. As I already mentioned, there are other macro languages you can use. The base one, which is Visual Basic in the LibreOffice world, is actually quite interesting because they ship a lot of pre-installed base macros, and some of them are really powerful. So I tried to abuse them, but they do not work. I don't know why. You always get the same error message, wrong amount of parameters or no parameters passed. And I tried to use my own base function, which I managed to do with some Googling skills. And no matter the amount of parameters I accept, it always decided it's the wrong amount of parameters. So maybe I get it working this year, let's see. They also support JavaScript, which is not really JavaScript, it's more like Java. Not sure why it actually exists, but it's a thing. Yeah, they also have support for Java itself and Bean Shell, but you actually have to install the Java runtime environment, and it must be available in the path. At least on Windows and Linux. And one problem to actually abuse them is the way how the path is created, because they don't use slashes like for Python, they just use dots. And no matter what I tried, I wasn't able to cause any kind of path traversals. So I couldn't abuse them, sadly. So let's talk about the backend a little bit. But first, we need more sharks. By the way, I like this title so much. much avalanche sharks. The snow will run red with blood. I watched it, it doesn't. In case you want to watch this movie, it's not the same movie as Snow Shark, that's a different one. But Snow Shark is actually really awesome. This one is also kind of fun. And no, I don't know why they exist, both movies. They act the same way, the sharks. Okay, so the first problem with macros on the back end. I take Imagemagick as an example because, at least in my opinion, it's the most used library to convert files. And it uses the headless mode, of course, of Libreoffice. So all this mouse over stuff doesn't work. It just doesn't execute any macros. But there is, thankfully, more events available, which I found weeks later, when you click on the right menu option. These are all the events which are available for a document to react on. And not all of them get executed in a headless mode when the file gets actually converted. But as an example, the highlighted one called view created gets executed. So when you use them, they actually look really similar to my client-side exploit. So I was like, oh yeah, I can use my proof of concept to attack backends as well. Yeah, sadly, it's not mentioned in the documentation, but I learned that when you use any kind of event which is related to the whole document itself, it just decided to add additional parameters. Sometimes it's 1, sometimes there are 2 additional parameters, sometimes there are even 4. So I couldn't use my proof of concept because I needed to control the last parameter, and it was not an option anymore. I tried to find another nice function to abuse, but sadly I couldn't. Maybe I wasn't looking good enough, but what can you do? So I decided to give polyglot files another go, so to include Python script inside my malicious Office file on the backend, and in this case I can assume I'm on Linux. I tried to abuse the proc self file descriptor folder, which basically contains all the open file descriptors of the current application. So I wanted to see if I can specify the file descriptor to the Office file itself to execute my own Python script, basically. That was my idea. In theory, it actually would work, because Python supports zip compressed files in Python 2 and 3, actually. And sadly, it didn't work, because they used the compile function. And the compile function accepts either a string, a byte string, or an abstract syntax tree. And in this case, it's always a string. So we have the same problem on the backend as on the client side. When I just include my Python script at the beginning of the Libreoffice file, Libreoffice won't parse it. But if I include any other crap which Libreoffice accepts at the beginning, Python will fail. So once again, I was stuck, and to this day I have no solution for that. So you would require to have an additional file you have full control of on the backend, and then you can actually exploit it. But thankfully there are other features I discovered while playing around with LibreOffice. You can link to external files. You can load remote images. There is something called special fields, And at first, I was hoping to abuse OLE objects in LibreOffice, but for some reason, they do not work at all in the headless mode. Either they are like a blank object or some stupid standard JPEG error will show up after conversion, so I basically gave up using them. But one feature which is kind of nice is the linking to external files. So basically, all of the LibreOffice application allow to link to external files on the file system. And you can hard code basically what you want to reference. Of course, most of the time, when you attack a backend based on Linux, you try to read etc passwd or stuff like that, or etc hosts or this kind of standard files. But there is a protection in place which requires some kind of user interaction to, I want to update the link. I have a bypass for this feature, but it's sadly not fixed, so you have to wait until it's fixed, and I can publish it on my blog post. External images, they're quite simple. You can use the file protocol, you can use HTTP, HTTPS. This allows to test the firewall of the server which is converting your Office file. Most of the time when HTTP or HTTPS is allowed, then basically all ports are allowed. That's kind of my experience so far. It's also nice to check if you can maybe use DNS for some DNS channels to steal data. And the developer version supports now PDF as JPEG files. So in case you want to read local PDFs of the backend and you know the location, you can actually include them in your Office files. And after they are converted to, I don't know, JPEG or whatever, they will contain the content of the PDF. Special fields, which are actually just called fields, but I call them special fields. They always get updated, also even in headless mode, so it doesn't matter in which context. On the writer, which means like ODT files, you can use features like full file path, which is basically always the first thing I use, because it shows you the file structure on the backend. It shows you if your own file name is used. So that's sometimes helpful, not all the time. Sometimes you can use the author to get the current user, but only sometimes for some reason. I tried to abuse the DDE, which is quite famous in the Microsoft Office world, because it was abused a lot to execute external programs. Sadly, it doesn't work the same way in LibreOffice, so they didn't port that feature. And additionally, they have, once again, the requirement when it's linking to an external program and data, you have the kind of user interaction. So it can't be really abused to attack the backend, sadly. The calc, which is basically the Excel version in LibreOffice, has no special fields, but it has, of course, functions like Excel has. And 2 years ago, I think, if I recall correctly, there was a function you could abuse called web service, which allowed to read either local files or any HTTP or HTTPS endpoint, and the content is actually stored inside the document without user interaction, actually. They decided it's a bug and fixed that, sadly. So maybe when you encounter a really old LibreOffice version, you can use that. Another cool feature I always abuse is the info call, because it allows you to check if you're on the Linux or Windows. You can check the exact version of the LibreOffice application which is used. And yeah, sadly the OS version is hard-coded to Windows NT 5. Actually, Microsoft Office supports this call properly, but LibreOffice just used NT 5. So yeah, you can see I still have some to-dos. I want to explore more about DDE in general, actually. I want to continue with getting a working Python injection on the backend and check how the base macro support actually works. There must be a way to get it working. I mean, it's in there, and somebody must have used it properly. Yeah, all the objects seem interesting, and there are just so many features you can use, and some of them work then in the backend in combination with Imagemagick. So maybe some of you want to join me in this awesome journey. We can watch some B-Shark movies together. So some general security considerations. Yeah, this was just a short overview of what you can do in such complex file formats. What you have to consider is when you use applications like Imagemagick, you maybe don't even realize you are supporting this file format, because when you upload like a Ghost script file or a Libreoffice file with a .jpeg extension, or some configurations of Imagemagick, or maybe all of them, I'm not sure now, try to sniff the actual type of the application, of the file. So it looks into the file, sees it's not a JPEG file, and then actually decides, oh, this is an Office file, or this is a Ghost script file, and suddenly you support the file types and you never wanted to. So you have to implement some kind of logic on your backend so that you verify you only support the file formats you want to check or convert. And this is actually really important, because we abused this a lot in the past. When you want to disable macro support in LibreOffice, good luck. I assumed there is like just an easy option. I don't want macros. I couldn't find one. Maybe I didn't look hard enough. For Python, you can just delete python script.py, then the feature is completely broken. When you don't have the Java runtime environment installed, you're fine. In case you have it installed and it's in your path, you have to disable it in LibreOffice, because it tries to actually find it and then use it for macros. Of course, you can use containers if possible, because then you're just really limiting the files, and you can disable network connections and stuff like that. And it's actually possible to run a file system jail for LibreOffice, and it's used in LibreOffice Online. And yes, that's a thing. There you can get the commands and the necessary files to run LibreOffice in a file system jail. Oh, yeah, Ghost Shark. This movie is so ridiculous. So this is about a shark who died, but for some reason he's a ghost. And as you know, ghosts can appear everywhere, and this shark can appear everywhere where there's water. Everywhere, in your bathtub, in your pool, and you can kill him because he's dead. Yeah, he can. He can eat everybody. He can even fly up into the sky for some reason. So this is my main part. Actually, I have still 5 minutes left. I can show you some additional content in case you want. Yes. No? Who said no? This is not really file format related, but it's Windows. Maybe you've heard about .url files on Windows. They're super old and still work in Windows 10. And I found this issue because of a necessity. We often had vulnerabilities where we can execute a program on Windows, but we weren't able to pass any parameters. And just opening calculator and CMD all the time is kind of boring. I wanted to prove that we can actually execute our own code. So when you execute, you can of course point to an SMB share or WebDAV share and execute an executable from there, but then it's blocked. There is like this nice warning box. Do you really want to execute it? So I have had to find a way around that. And there was a nice thing called Dll Hijacking, which still is a thing. And I decided to use the .url file format because you can execute it from a remote SMB share without a warning. You can define the application which should get executed, and you can define the working directory. And you can point the working directory to your remote SMB share, which is awesome. So, what will happen when you execute a lot of executables stored in Windows and point the working directory to your SMB share? That's basically what I did. And I found that main.cpl, at least on 2 systems and 1 VM, it worked. And on 1 VM on my cubes, it doesn't work for some reason. It still tries to load it, the remote DLL, but then something fails. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's cubes. Must be cubes. Too secure. Yeah, but basically how it works, you can execute main.cpl, which is the settings for your mouse. And then it will try to load mouse.dll from the remote SMB share. And when it's there, it gets executed. And that's basically how I did it. And I have a beautiful video somewhere. Yeah, in this case, I just used my local $C share, but I verified it with remote SMB shares. Don't worry. So, as you can see, there is the mouse.dll. This is the test.url file. Yeah, you don't see the extension. In case you're wondering, yes, you can change the icon because there is a parameter for icon you want to use. Bless you. And yeah, this .url file basically contains this payload here. And now you will see what happens. And now it's open. That's basically the normal window. In case, yeah, I reported it to Microsoft. There is a registry key you can set, which nobody does. Libreoffice actually had a bypass, which allowed me to abuse that, but somebody reported it before me. And now they have a similar behavior to Microsoft Office. And what they do, they actually pass the .url file and check the executable it points to. So when you try to use the remote smb.url file as a link in Microsoft Office, you will see a dialog with, do you really want to execute main.cpl? and then you have to click like 2 times yes, yes, so it's not really nice. So at least Microsoft is aware of that. So yeah, that's that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I think we have time for a few questions. Anyone? Getting tired? Here we have one. Let's see if I can make this work. Yep, I can. I think it's already on.
Hello. Interesting talk. Thank you. I don't know if you already said this, but when Imagemagick uses LibreOffice for file conversion, does it also support Microsoft Office document formats?
Oh, yeah, it does.
So
you can use certain features of Microsoft Office in LibreOffice because it's supported. Yeah. You can also use the file extensions. Like you can literally use a created file from Microsoft Office. Sometimes you have to change the file extension in case there are some file extensions restrictions, but in general, yeah, it works.
So did you look anything into the conversion or import features of LibreOffice?
Yeah, I tested some of them, but so far nothing came up, but I just got started.
Awesome, thank you.
So, anyone else? Yep.
I also can talk about B-Shark movies. I have 20 more I can talk about.
Hi, thanks. It was great talk. Have you tried? So I don't know if Microsoft Office supports the ODT format, and if yes, can you use that in Microsoft Office?
Yeah, I tried that, but Microsoft Office supports LibreOffice file formats because these slides were first created first in LibreOffice Impress, or what it's called, then in PowerPoint, and then back to LibreOffice. So yeah, you can switch between them, but many features do not work. Like the macro support is not at all there, sadly. And yeah, most stuff basically just gets ignored by Microsoft Office, sadly.
Thank you. Anyone else? Here, yes, sir.
What B-Shark movie is most B and therefore most awesome?
Most awesome. I would say Two-Headed Shark Attack is really funny because they talk so much bullshit all the time. The worst one. All the Mega Sharks are pretty terrible. I think Mega Shark versus Mechatronic Shark. And yeah, it's a real movie.
Okay.
By the way, there are 3 movies with Mega Shark.
Thank you, Alex, for this amazing talk.